Hello everyone! Today we're going to be looking at how to ace creative writing. Let's get straight into it. So the first thing that we're going to do for the creative is go through a checklist, so you know that you're ready for the exam. Firstly, you should draft your creative multiple times. Now this means handing your creative into your teacher, getting feedback, and then changing things. You will have to change your creative multiple times. You can't expect that what you write the first time around is going to be perfect. My own creative that I wrote changed perspectives, so it was in the voice of one character, and then my final draft was in the voice of another. It changed settings, locations, though the characters stayed the same, and I guess the basic plot outline, it did drastically change from first draft to last draft. And it's really through that process of drafting that you can perfect the voice of your characters and also really narrow in on the points of discovery that you want to focus on. You should also sit down and practice adapting your creative to stimuluses. Now, I know this may seem easy, you sit down with one past paper and you can adapt it fine, it's all good. You really need to look at a bunch of papers and adapt it to heaps of different questions in order to make sure that it is truly adaptable, because sometimes questions can be drastically different in terms of how they ask you to integrate stimuluses. Like one might say use it as an inspiration, or another might say use it as a core. You've really got to be ready for all of those different types of stimuluses, and the only way to do that is to practice, of course. I rewrote my creative for every paper that I could find, including HSC past papers, but as well as other trial papers from other schools. You should also rewrite the parts of your creative that were criticised during your trial. You can't expect to improve if you write the exact same creative that you did in trial in your HSC. So in these few weeks where you don't really want to do that much work, you're graduating from school, etc., perhaps a good idea is just to rework your creative according to what feedback you got in trial. You could also give your creative to various teachers and markers to make sure you get different perspectives on it. I would be wary of giving your creative to the same teacher that you've given it to for the entire year, because they're going to be very familiar with your narrative, right? They're not reading it with fresh eyes like a marker in their marking centre would. So I would be constantly on the lookout to who you can give your creative to get feedback. Remember, you're no longer competing with other students either. That is, other students in your school. So there's no harm in giving your creative to your best friend that's in your English class and asking them to read it as well. You should also know that you can write your creative within 40 minutes. Now, this doesn't mean that, if you have a 1,000-word creative and you can only write it in 50, that you should cut words down. No, I think that instead you should, learn your creative well enough that you can reproduce it within 40 minutes, and that's totally doable. Remember, you really do want to have a creative of around 1,000 words to give yourself the best chance of getting full marks. There are some common complaints though, and one of them is, I am really unhappy with my trial marks, so should I completely change what I have prepared so far? I would advise you to pay attention to your feedback and what is it targeting. So if it's saying, the imagery isn't strong enough here, or I think you could use a better metaphor, then it's not saying that you should change your story. It's saying that you should change the way that you write or the way that you express your ideas. This does not mean that you have to completely change the plot. Instead, put what you had prepared before trial in front of you, so print it off on your desk, and have a new blank Word document open. Then focus paragraph by paragraph on rewriting what the focus of that paragraph was. So in your first paragraph, if you wanted to introduce your characters and set the scene, try and rewrite that within different words on the new blank document so that you're perfecting your writing craft rather than, completely rewriting the plot. However, if it is saying, this idea is a little bit stereotypical, or that it's not really hitting the concept of discovery, then you have to think about completely rewriting some parts of your plot. Also ask yourself if you are able to effectively incorporate the stimulus within the confines of your story in trials. Your story may be so specific that any stimulus is going to kind of throw you off track and mean that you're going to freak out in the exam room. If this is the case, maybe you need to widen the scope of your creative, or widen the character's perspectives instead of it being a single issue creative. Also think, as I said before, can you write your creative from another perspective? So is there another character in your piece that, you know, would have a better view of the discovery in the story rather than the one you're writing in now? Therefore, you're not completely rewriting your plot. You can stick with the same idea, but you're changing the spin or the meaning of the discovery because you're changing the perspective from which it's written. Other people say simply, I am just going to start again, or I didn't have a concrete creative for trials. What should I do? I would say that you could write from the perspective of one of your characters in your prescribed texts. You already know the concepts of discovery in that prescribed text. Why not use it as, you know, your own creative? Obviously, you can't blatantly rip off a text, but you can use it for inspiration, and indeed that's what the extension paper asked extension students to do last year, was to use a main character in their creative. So there's no reason why you can't do this and can't use this as inspiration. Even, you could compare your childhood perspectives on an idea or an experience to the perspective that you have now. Explore the influences of this change in perspective in a creative. I've always said that the best creatives come from talking about your own experience because it makes it unique. And when a story is unique, it's going to grab the attention of the marker. So this is one way that you may want to, you know, think about what you've discovered in your lifetime or what you've discovered as you've gotten older. Alternatively, you could make yourself write a creative for one of the past papers that have been asked before. So literally sit yourself down with a past paper and make yourself write something within 40 minutes. It's not going to be your best work, and it's definitely not what you should then go and write in your HSC, but it at least gives you a creative to work with. Like, it gives you an idea to then develop into something else. So like, treat it as your very first, very basic draft, and then build on the plot and the characters that you have written in it in successive drafts. This is a really good way to get started if you're just struggling to write anything at all or start your creative at all. Just make yourself answer a past question and see how it goes from there. A lot of people also ask, how do I integrate a stimulus? Well, if it's only a question, and this is a question that was asked in the ATAR notes paper, compose a piece of imaginative writing that explores the complications of discovery. Include a significant relationship that is affected by discovery. Here's what you should do. First, define the key terms with your creative in mind. So, for example, complications means outcomes, for me at least, and thinking of my creative I used last year. How do these consequences of discovery affect my character's understanding of themselves? How can I contrast this to another outcome of discovery, perhaps in another character? I would also define significant relationship as, in my creative, the relationship between herself, like the relationship that she has with herself, and her relationship to art. So it doesn't always have to be, you know, a relationship to another person, whatever fits with your creative the best. Then I would plot out where these themes are going to be shown in my piece. So for the complications or outcomes part, I would contrast the daughter and father's reaction to the discovery experience. And specifically, I would talk about the daughter and make a conscious effort to talk about the daughter's reaction in the first paragraph and the father in the fourth. Actually delegating paragraphs where you're going to integrate the stimulus can be really handy because then there's no way of avoiding it. I was also going to talk about the relationship in the first paragraph and highlight how art is important to her there. I was going to describe it through metaphor, and then have this metaphor change, so like make it become a motif throughout the piece to show how her relationship changes as an effect of the discovery. For a picture and a statement, it gets a little bit harder. So this was one of the stimuluses given, or two of the stimuluses rather, given in 2015, so the first year of discovery. It asked you to use one of these images and then explore the unexpected impact of discovery. Firstly, I would make a thesis statement about these images, much like you would a short answer. So for the first picture, I would say discovery's worth may be reassessed over time. And then the second picture, I would say discovery can lead us to new opportunities and perspectives. So like these are the lines of arguments that I would use if I was going to answer a short answer. I would then link this to the question. So for the first photo, I would say we do not expect well-established discoveries to be reassessed over time. And for the second, that discovery can lead us to new opportunities and perspectives that contravene our previous expectations. I will then decide where this will be suggested in my creative, so once again, delegating a paragraph. I will also make an explicit link to the stimulus that represents this idea. So coming up with a thesis and then integrating it into your creative is a conceptual link to the picture provided, which of course is very insightful. However, I would be safe in also integrating like the literal stimulus into your creative. So if I was to use the first one, I might use the line, "His brow furrows and his eyes dart from her own menacing gaze, as if to avoid the meaning of her callous words." Right, so that's saying that he's not going to expect, like, he doesn't want to accept what her words connote, nor does he want to have to reassess what's happened to him. Secondly, I might write, "A shriveled red balloon sat discarded in the corner of her shelf. Why had she held on to it after it had popped?" So this shows that you don't have to take like what is literally in the stimulus. I don't have to talk about a brick wall that looks like a curtain. I can take one part and, in this case, which is the balloon, I can take one part and meld it to what I was already going to write in my creative, or meld it to what makes sense with my creative. It doesn't have to be literally what is in the photo. Okay, that's the end of creative writing. I hope that's been really, really helpful. If not, please let me know. Leave some questions on the ATAR Notes forums and I'll try to get to them. Thanks guys, good luck for your HSC.